My Michelle Live with Michelle Mendoza. Now, here's Michelle.
Today on Science and Technology Talk, the marvels of man and music. Can music show evidence of God?
Science and Technology.
Well, we start with a fascinating story of a very gifted violinist whose talent was cut short. A tragic car accident robbed a classic violinist of her speech and movement.
In 1988, Rosie suffered a devastating brain injury in a car crash.
Rosie shone. She was a lovely player.
Rosemary Johnson never lost her passion for the violin. Now, using only the power of her mind, she's able to make music. It's cutting-edge technology that turns her thoughts into song. An EKG attached to a computer picks up electronic impulses and turns it into music, translating her thoughts and retina movements into music on a page. And it comes to life with help of an orchestra.
30 years after her last premiere, concert violinist Rosie Johnson witnessed her latest recording. Sensors and software developed by Plymouth University and the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability mean Rosie can once more select the phrasing and timing of a performance.
And after 30 years, Rosie can do that again.
Recently awarded an MBE for services to music, you can be sure this is not Rosie's final performance.
Okay, let's look deep into the God story in science and technology. Can we find evidence of God? We're going to look for it and see in the midst of it if we can give you reasons to believe.
Reasons to believe.
And joining us, Dr. Rana is a Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe. He's the author of some incredible books like Who Was Adam?, Creating Life in the Lab, and Cells Design.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you again.
Fuz, the marvels of man and music. Does that point to a God story? Let's start with this story of the brain-damaged violinist that makes music with her mind.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating story of a woman named Rosemary Johnson, who was a member of the Welsh National Orchestra. She was, as you mentioned, a promising violinist, and in 1988 was involved in a car accident, suffered a devastating head injury, and was left essentially unable to speak, and for all intents and purposes a quadriplegic, where her movement was greatly compromised. And so she's essentially, her musical career comes to an end. She's trapped inside of her own mind, if you will. And yet, thanks to a project that's been underway at the University of Plymouth and in collaboration with the Royal Hospital of Neurodisabilities in London, she's now able to actually make music through a new technology that involves basically a brain-computer interface, where these scientists have figured out a way to use the technology that's employed when people record EEGs of your brain activity, and to essentially use that technology to identify notes that she would think in her mind, and then transform those notes onto a computer screen that then other musicians can actually play. And so she and four other people who suffer similar types of disabilities, have formed a musical ensemble with a string quartet where they're actually going to perform live, where, again, the members of the ensemble that are, quadriplegic are going to basically produce the music live, and then it's going to be played by these musicians. And so this is astounding technology that basically allows Rosemary Johnson and others like her to unlock the thoughts that are in her mind through music.
Doctor, as a biochemist, you have an understanding of how some of the things work in our body, the chemistry of our body, and even in our brain. There's so much to our brain that we haven't tapped into. So, how does this? One, how does this work, and how does this show the uniqueness of man?
Yeah, well, in a sense, what's going on here is that they're able to take the electrical activity that happens in the brain when the neurons are firing, recognizing that different neuron combinations are going to produce different types of notes. And that's essentially what they're doing, and they're able to detect that electrical activity with the pads that are part of the cap used when an EEG is recorded. But what this is saying to me in terms of human uniqueness is that we're more than just simply our brain. I mean, this is essentially what the evolutionary paradigm would say, what a naturalistic paradigm would say, that we're only our brain, and that everything that's about human beings is ultimately due to kind of the physical chemistry of our brains, nothing more, nothing less. But yet, what's interesting to me is that even though Rosemary Johnson spent 30 years unable to speak, she was still there, right? She was still there, even though her brain was severely damaged, and that through this technology, they're unlocking her capacity to communicate. And so she's no longer trapped essentially inside of her own mind. But that's saying to me that there's something more to human beings than just simply our brain, that there's this non-physical component of who we are that's consistent with this idea that we're made in God's image, where we're not just physical beings, but we're physical beings and spiritual beings together.
Now, there's been a research along the way of the God spot in the brain. And maybe God doesn't really exist because it's just this God spot, this place in our brain that says that there is a God or that I need something beyond myself. Yet you kind of look at what comes first. It's the chicken and the egg scenario. Really? Maybe we have something like that because God created us with a God-shaped hole in our soul and maybe even our brain as well. And I think it speaks to this situation. And if you're just joining us, Dr. Rana with Reasons to Believe, we're taking on a wonderful news story about how a violinist trapped within her body after a tragic accident has been now, due to technology, able to compose. Sometimes we devalue human life to the point where if you do not function, if you do not look like, if you are not in this certain cookie cutter cutout, you have no value in normal society.
Yeah, and all very good points. And going to back to the God spot comment about there's this area of our brain, for me as a Christian, that makes perfect sense, as you're alluding to. And the way I like to think about it is that the brain and the spirit, if you will, the brain and the mind, are kind of analogous to a computer hardware and software, combination, where you can think of the brain as being like the hardware and our spirit or our mind, if you will, being like the software. And, of course, if you're going to have a being that's going to be able to express ourselves spiritually, there's going to be hardware that's going to support that. So the fact that there's a God spot in the brain, I don't think in any way undermines a Christian view of humanity. I think it actually, as you're alluding to, Michelle, strongly supports it. And, this computer hardware software analogy is helpful.
Yes, yeah.
Again, when you think about Rosemary Johnson, is that, her hardware was damaged, but she was still there. Again, her software was still functioning. And so with this technology, you're kind of enabling the hardware to work just enough that she's able to now suddenly express the image of God through music.
That it would point to just how brilliant man is and how far we've evolved. But what seems to happen is it just shows more and more of the intricacies. Just computer programs, the hardware that's needed to connect to Rosemary's brain is so advanced. I can't imagine that just happening by accident, just like a plane crashes and all these pieces fall together in a machine that magically hooks up to Rosemary's brain and suddenly she's composing music through her thoughts. That would be the equivalent of what we're asking people to believe.
Yeah, well, you like in this brain computer, music interface project, you have two teams from, prestigious universities and hospitals that are, working, for 10 years to be able to tap into the mind and to be able to allow people like Rosemary Johnson to express herself. And yet, when the brain is functioning properly, it's something that's almost effortless. And so just that the amount of ingenuity and knowledge it took for even to get the technology to the point that it is now,
Yeah.
over the span of 10 years, just highlights, I think, how brilliant the design is of the human brain. And so I think there's no way to explain the brain and the mind other than that it's the handiwork of a creator.
So well put. This is a crazy, interesting story, and it is always so much fun to speak with you, Dr. Rana. There's another twist to this story that I find fascinating, and it is the uniqueness of music. You don't see, my cat, I've never seen my cat sitting down and whistling a tune. Arguably, you might hear a parrot, but a parrot isn't listening to the lyrics, appreciating the music, understanding the noise that it's making. It's just simply mimicking, not quite the same. There's just something immensely powerful and very unique about the connection between music and humanity, and even our need to express through music and even worship.
Yes, one of the things that distinguishes human beings from all other creatures is this idea of symbolism, that human beings uniquely have this ability to represent the world and ideas in symbols that we can manipulate in an infinite number of ways. And so, for example, language is a form of symbolism where the words, whether spoken or written, are symbols that we can, again, manipulate and create all these alternate possibilities. But music is also a form of symbolism, as is art and even jewelry use or body ornamentation. These are all symbols that allow us to communicate with one another, and no other creature has that capacity for symbolism. And in fact, there's a growing number of anthropologists and primatologists who, even though they're evolutionary biologists, are reluctantly acknowledging that humans are unique in this capacity. And I see symbolism as a manifestation of the image of God. And isn't it interesting that, Rosemary Johnson, as according to the articles about her, as soon as she was able to make music, people were just saying it was the joy emanating from her was undeniable. That she has had this compulsion to communicate, to express herself symbolically, and no other creature has that compulsion. And it's very much part of who we are. And again, it all makes sense when you think about the biblical view of human beings being made in God's image as these symbolic creatures that have this capacity that reflects essentially God's very image.
It's hard to draw any other conclusion. It's hard to, because there is no link between Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and being able to have a human create something so intense and so beautiful, and even an ape that, maybe banging on a drum. There's just no intermediate kind of a link there. So someone does have to draw the conclusion. How is this? Why is this? What is it about our makeup that makes us this way? Now, this situation that we're talking about with Rosemary Johnson, and we have as our guest from Reasons to Believe, Dr. Rana, this is actually going to be part of a bigger project, not just the symphony where this woman who played the violin in an accident was no longer able to even communicate effectively, now hooked up to technology and is now composing. We're going to see her compositions, watch other violinists and musicians playing what her mind and her heart is creating. And this is part of an actual documentary.
Yeah, and that's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to see that documentary because, again, I think that's the type of thing that as Christians we should not only watch ourselves but share with our non-Christian friends, because what a great opportunity to have some really significant conversations about human nature and what does it really mean to be a human being, and this idea that we're just more than our body, that there really is a spiritual makeup to who we are, in line with what Scripture, teaches us about the origin of humanity.
And this is why science is so exciting, because the deeper you dig, the more you find.
Yes, that's very much the case. And this whole idea of human uniqueness, again, is really very profound. And in fact, it's interesting because when you look at the archaeological record, when modern humans appear on the scene, virtually out of nowhere, you suddenly see for the very first time, evidence for musical expression and artistic expression, and these activities would not have contributed to human survival in any way, shape, or form. These are not activities that evolution would drive because it increases survivability. In fact, it detracts from survivability. And when you go to some of the earliest archaeological sites of modern humans, it's very clear that they were just compelled to create. Some of the oldest musical instruments, for example, are made out of ivory, which would have been the most precious material that humans could have accessed. And these flutes that they were making had to be manufactured in pieces because ivory is solid. And they actually had to piece these pieces together to produce these musical instruments. And these are usually found in sites where it looks as if it was an artist's studio or a musician's studio where they were preparing these instruments. Or the cave art is incredibly elaborate and massive in scale. And no other creature was doing anything like this. And in fact, anthropologists call this the sociocultural Big Bang, or the human revolution, where modern humans show up and out of nowhere, this sophisticated behavior shows up.
I have absolute goosebumps because it's that's such a profound statement. The beauty of art and music does not enhance survivability, but indeed would take away. Why would I be playing a flute when I should be out there hunting me fine food, right?
Yes, it is. And there's no explanation from an evolutionary perspective for why suddenly that behavior would emerge so explosively when there's no antecedent to that behavior in any creature that preceded humans. And if you think about the idea that humans would be made in God's image, that's exactly what I would expect the archaeological record to look like, is that when human beings show up, boom, this behavior shows up because human beings were made in God's image, and it was the Creator's handiwork that we're seeing, evidence for in this sociocultural Big Bang. So, to me, these kind of discoveries just provide such powerful support for this notion of human uniqueness, and are deeply encouraging to me as a Christian, because it really does mean that human beings are special, we're exceptional, and it really shows that all human beings have intrinsic worth and intrinsic dignity because we bear the image of God. Rosemary Johnson has intrinsic worth and value, even though she's a quadriplegic, because she bears God's image, and even a brain injury can't suppress the image of God. Once that technology was there to unleash the image of God, out it flowed, in the form of this music that she's now able to compose.
Oh, that is so powerful. And here's some of her compilations, some music from Rosemary Johnson, and maybe it can remind all of us that we really do have reasons to believe.
Reasons to Believe.
Dr. Fuz Rana, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have you on the air again. Until next time, God bless you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to My Michelle Live. Our podcasts are available at MyMichelleLive.com.